Welcome to the EcoThink podcast. I'm Maia.
And I'm Yuko.
And this is the podcast where you join us on a dive into climate change and social justice issues through a STEAM lens. Each episode, we'll break down silos, build up amazement, and bring on action. Today is a little bit something special. It's a session 0, and we're talking about who we are. Basically, we figured that it would be good for the audience to get a little bit of an idea of who's talking to you. We're going to discuss together why we're doing this, what our previous experience is in environmental science, and maybe some, interesting tidbits. Also, we want to invite you to join us on Instagram and Twitter at EcoThink Productions. If you would like to join the EcoGeeks in supporting this podcast, you can do that on Patreon at www.patreon.com/EcoThink. Now, let's get on to the show. Hey, Yuko, how's it going?
I'm good. This is the first episode and I'm already stumbling.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, but you know what? I think that's great. We'll just leave this in.
I'm already stumbling so hard. See, I have no trouble talking to children. Give me 30 kids.
Yeah.
I'll take 30 kids over this.
It's just your friend on the other end of a video call.
I know.
There's nobody else here.
That is fair. That is fair. All right, let's jump into what this episode is really about. Mm-hmm. I want to introduce myself. My name is Yuko. I am interested in environmental science because that is essentially my entire post-secondary schooling. My academic background is in marine biology. I hold a bachelor's degree in marine bio, and I now work for a very, very awesome environmental not-for-profit in Victoria.
Yeah, well, for anyone listening, we are located in Victoria, Canada. And I think you said you went to, was it UBC or UVic?
UVic,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a pretty awesome marine bio program.
They got some amazing professors at UVic.
Who was your favorite?
Oh, I don't want to say it out loud.
But we should get them on the podcast. I think that would be so much fun.
Okay. My absolute favorite professor from UVic has to be Dr. Louise Page. She taught a survey of invertebrates class.
Amazing.
And everything I've learned in that class, I use it in my job. I work, teaching kids about the ocean, helping kids with ocean literacy, and, surprisingly, a lot of students don't know about the critters that live on our coast, even though we live on an island.
Yeah, it's amazing how much you can learn about the intertidal zone. We'll definitely have to have an episode or two about all of those amazing critters that you work with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, you worked with them too, Maia.
Well, yeah, that's true. Up until very recently. So I guess I should introduce myself as well. My name's Maia Karlsfeld, and we used to work at the same NGO doing marine education. And then I decided to move on and start up my own company. I know, weird times. Why am I doing this during a pandemic? You might ask. Well, it was just, a brainchild that needed to be birthed. There's going to be more of this in this podcast. It's not going to get any less weird, I promise. Sorry, listeners. Why am I interested in environmental science? Okay, I came to environmental science in a very circuitous route. I've always been interested in it, as growing up and such, but I never really prioritized sciences in schooling. I was good at them, but it was never something that I was like, I want to go to university to study this. And that was for a variety of reasons. I was very focused on travel, very focused on wanting to learn languages. And my undergraduate degree was actually in Chinese language and culture, which I didn't actually end up using all that much because I didn't go to China. I went to Korea to teach English. Anyway, very circuitous. When I came back to Canada, I realized, what I really want to do is I want to work in environmental science. And so now I'm currently doing an online master's degree in carbon management. And it's the best thing that I've ever decided to do because I'm finally getting to do something that I genuinely want to do every day. I'm
nerd.
Yeah, I know. I'm a super nerd. I'm not ashamed to say it. So, did you want to talk a little bit more about what you do for work?
Yeah, I would love to. I never thought I would find a job in my field after I graduated, as I think most new graduates.
Hashtag millennial.
Oh my God. It was, I was very lucky. I found the NGO that I work for now through volunteering, because I was originally planning on studying to be a teacher. That's still on the table, but I'm focusing on developing this education program where I get to bring live animals, so live intertidal animals, so things like sea stars, sea cucumbers, crabs, barnacles, which are my favorite animal ever. I get to bring them into classrooms, into schools, and kind of teach kids about our coast. And then I also get to bring kids out to the ocean, weather and tides permitting, and teach them about the Salish Sea. The Salish Sea is near and dear to my heart because I grew up right next to it. So that's what I do for work now, and I basically coordinate a lot of the education programs. I still don't know if it's appropriate to really say the name of the NGO. Maybe it'll help us get funders. Maybe it won't.
We'll talk about it. I think it's one of those things where as we get more comfortable with podcasting, we'll figure it out. So if you're one of our early listeners, you'll have the mystery of where Yuko works, but it may be down the line that she shares it with us.
This goes against everything I learned about internet safety as a child.
I mean, to be fair, it's not like you're sharing your address. It's like a work thing.
I guess so, but everything against what I learned about internet safety.
Fair enough.
But anyways, you talked about where you worked already, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can do a little bit more. My new business is called EcoThink Productions, and this podcast is actually part of the business. And basically, the whole point of EcoThink Productions is to help people engage with environmental issues in a way that is more uplifting and fun and creative than what we often see. I'm well aware that climate change is extremely stressful, and my goal is to try and make it a little bit less stressful through engaging content and sustainability business coaching. So that's what EcoThink Productions is. It's very new. I'm definitely learning things as I go. If you're interested in learning more about what I do, you can go to my website, www.ecothinkproductions.com. And I would love to hear from you if you have any questions about sustainability and business. So now that we've talked a little bit about that, I'd be really curious to know what are some science topics that you're really excited to dig into during this podcast, Yuko?
Oh, I have a list for this.
You and your lists.
I love my list.
To be fair, I also have a lot of lists.
So one of the first topic that sprang to mind when we talked about this podcast was plastics. You know how plastic production is just this huge, ginormous beast that we have to tackle. There's no good answer for it, and it's just a difficult thing to wrap your head around. And the reason why I was so interested in this was because I was watching the new season of Doctor Who.
Did they talk about it?
One of the episodes was about an alien, I think it was alien bacteria or organism that fed on plastic. And because a lot of seabirds, their stomach is just full of plastic because that's what they end up eating, this alien pathogen or alien bacteria started killing a bunch of seabirds.
Oh no.
And so it's just like, oh, I remember seeing a couple months ago something about a plastic eating bacteria. So I kind of just went down a rabbit hole.
I love, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say that I love it when like pop culture like shows or what have you incorporate climate issues into their story. I find it so fascinating how they do that, because I think like, I mean, maybe you've already found this out and you're digging for the plastics topic, but they've developed a bacteria that actually does eat plastic. Am I wrong?
There is something about it. I haven't found super solid research just yet.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll find out more when the date comes around to record that episode. Stay tuned.
Yeah. And another topic, let me just refer back to my notes here. I've always been fascinated by the deep sea, and deep sea mining is something that's slowly starting to be more and more popular as another way for us to extract resources. And because the deep sea is so far removed from our daily lives that we don't really think about how our actions on land not only affect the ocean that we can see and can explore, but also parts of the ocean that isn't as accessible. So that's another topic that I'm super interested in learning more about.
Yeah. I have to say that I'm very interested in hearing what you find out about those two topics. I know I'm currently looking into something a little bit less sexy sounding. I'm looking into species distribution, and what that means is essentially how a species of fish, for example, chooses to just entirely move neighborhoods based on how warm the water is where they are, because their biology doesn't handle warmer water than what they're normally used to. And I think it's been really interesting looking into it, especially because you actually get some really interesting and kind of scary, but also kind of cool stories of fishermen that have like fished out this massive sunfish, which is a tropical fish, and that's like way farther north than it should ever be. And so it's a really interesting concept that I don't really know much about, but I'm learning more and more as I dig into it, and it's quite fascinating. And then the other one that I'm pretty excited in looking into, I'm very, very excited to dig into the history of climate science, because it's way longer than most people think. Guys, did you know that the first scientist to publish a paper about the effect of carbon dioxide on our atmosphere was a woman?
I did not know that.
I totally forget her name, but I'm excited to look into it, and I'm excited to do all the fact checking because I think that's really, really cool.
I love the fact that we can kind of incorporate, because history has always been written by men. At least the history that we learned in school is what I found as I got older. So it's really interesting that we get to kind of incorporate topics outside or disciplines outside of just science.
Yeah.
Because everything is related, right? Everything is interconnected. Different disciplines support each other.
Sure.
You can't have science in a vacuum.
No, exactly. I don't think we can at all. And I think it's so enriching to look at it from an interconnected kind of focus. So I'm really looking forward to digging into those topics and many more.
Yeah. I think the next question here is, what is your favorite sustainable action item that you want to share to people?
Ooh, well, trying to think of ones that haven't been repeated a million times over.
I unplug all of my appliances when I'm not using them. I don't know if this is something that's been trained into me by my parents or if it's like something I picked up at school.
It saves a bit of energy, that's for sure. I know it was also touted as being a good way to reduce carbon emissions. Although it's interesting too, because like all of the energy saving tips here in British Columbia, I know that not all of our energy is green, but a lot of it is. So it kind of not as much impact as one might think. But it's still good to do, for sure. Yeah. For sure. I think for me, if it is accessible to you, I want to encourage everyone listening to go to the dollar store and get yourself a little sewing kit and look up on YouTube. There's like little 3-minute videos on how to mend like holes in your clothing, of pretty much of all kinds. And this is something I'm challenging myself to do as well. This is why I wanted to bring it up, because too often the gut reaction of, oh, I've got a hole in my clothing means that it has to be thrown out or thrown into the donation bin, at which, shocker, it doesn't really help that it's thrown into the donation bin. If you want to know more about why, let us know. We might do a podcast episode on that. But yeah, I want to encourage everyone to go get a little sewing kit. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're a man, woman, in between. It doesn't matter if you're old, young. I don't care. Get a sewing kit. It's for a couple bucks and it'll save you money. And that's not something that's new either. You know, people all over the world have been mending their clothes for ages. So I think people need to do it more where that skill has been forgotten.
I just tear the hole bigger and pretend it's the new distress trend.
See, that works if it's a strategically placed hole. If you're like me and you're a little bit on the plus size, the holes are not so comfortable.
That's absolutely fair. Absolutely fair.
Oh, yes.
Oh, I know my favorite sustainable item. It is my coffee thermos. I cannot live without that thing.
Do you make coffee before you leave the house in it or something like that?
I do make coffee every morning, except for some mornings when I have to be at work at 6 a.m. But most mornings I do make coffee because it's, one, cheaper, and two, with the pandemic, a lot of our coffee shops are actually not accepting personal cups right now. Mm-hmm. And before the pandemic, I would treat myself to a fancy coffee once in a while, but if it means I can't use my coffee mug, I feel a very big sense of guilt taking a to-go cup.
Yeah.
I usually don't grab a lid or a sleeve when I do a to-go cup, just because we think we're recycling, but the recycling industry, it's quite problematic, which I'm hoping to break down in our plastic section, or sorry, plastic episode.
Oh, it's a fascinating topic.
I just feel like if I can help it, I try not to use anything to go or anything that's only one use.
I'm not sure exactly when this episode will be aired, but if cafes are finally starting to reallow reusable mugs by then, I sincerely hope so. And if not, if they're not allowing it in your area where you're listening to this podcast, persevere. It's hopefully temporary. And as things open back up, hopefully we see a use of reusable mugs again as well. Mm-hmm. The next question is a little bit about where we are located. Generally speaking, we're located on Vancouver Island. I'm in Victoria. I'm not sure if Yuko wants to share any more about where she is.
I'm also on Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
I might be living in the woods. I might be living underwater. You'll never know.
And yeah, we're both pretty grateful to live here, I think. I grew up on the island my whole life, originally from a small town outside of Victoria. And it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous place.
Have you always considered, have you always been aware of the environment as you were growing up on the island? Like environmental issues or just your impact?
I do recall, like, as early as middle school, there being environmental issues brought up in school and, like, being part of groups that dealt with things like recycling and, like, trying to get people to recycle at the time. And I remember a lot of that, but outside of that kind of school activism, I always just thought of the environment as just the gorgeous nature that's all around us and kind of took it for granted. You know, I'll admit that. I think I took it for granted up until I moved away for the first time. I actually moved to Ontario to start my undergraduate degree. As beautiful as Ottawa is, it's very different from Victoria. And I think once that kind of brought home to me just how amazing Victoria is and how much I love it here, that's when the environmental ism, so to speak, really got started in me, I think. Yeah. Because when you're surrounded by it, it's just considered, like when you're surrounded by nature, you're just like, oh yeah, this is totally normal. And, you know, don't litter because it's so beautiful, and like pick up garbage if you see it, because like, why wouldn't you pick it up? And I never really thought of it as one of those things that's like, this is special to do. It was just, you had to do it. And that being said, definitely not doing all of the environmentalism things that people think of as being environmental, like growing up, like you definitely weren't a picture perfect hippie family by any means. But yeah, what about you? Did you grow up on the island?
I did not grow up on the island, but I did grow up very close, on the other side of Georgia Strait.
Aha!
I grew up in the Greater Vancouver area. I lived in Vancouver, and then I also lived in Surrey when I was a teen. So I was in Vancouver. I grew up in a very suburban area, so it was just literally houses. There was a lot of imported cherry blossom trees in my neighborhood. Everything was very pristine and very manicured, very nice, very pretty. So I never really thought of myself living in nature. And then I moved to Surrey, and Surrey was just in development. So it was construction everywhere. There was new neighborhoods going up when I was there. And it wasn't until I started volunteering at the Vancouver Aquarium as a teenager that I really started to connect with our local and natural ocean ecosystems. It was where I actually learned, holy crap, there is so much life underwater. There's so much cool things to learn about, to know about. Ecosystems and relationships between species is amazing. And yeah, and so I didn't actually grow up even considering nature, really. I did the things that school taught us. Don't litter, turn off the lights. The turning off the lights is mostly because my dad yelled at me every time the lights were on.
Yeah.
Very typical.
Oh yeah, we've all been there. My dad does the same.
You're wasting my money. But yeah, and then I all of a sudden high school was over and I had to go to university. So I chose the most logical thing at the time for me was I'll just go pursue marine biology because this is interesting.
And then you never looked back.
No. And then I moved to UVic because I was like, what better place to learn about the ocean than living on an island?
Yeah, it's pretty cool here for sure. It's so funny because growing up, I was obsessed with getting away. I don't know if that's just normal, but I was always like, I want to move away. I want to be some hot shot, like diplomat is what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I don't know, I tried moving away. I did it. It's kind of cool. It's great for a lot of people. I'd probably do it again and maybe job paid well enough. But man, oh man, does it nice here.
Yes. Just comparing where I live now and where I was living when I was in the Greater Vancouver area, huge difference. Like I feel so much more relaxed here because I look out the window and I stick my head out the window and I can smell the ocean.
Exactly.
Whereas in Surrey, you stick your head out the window and you smell concrete and cars.
So something that we wanted to discuss as part of this episode as well is we wanted to point out some potential biases that we may have and may be bringing to this podcast so that you guys as listeners can help keep us accountable. So I'll go first. I have grown up in a pretty affluent neighborhood my entire life. So I've not had to deal with things like poverty. I'm also Caucasian, so I have not had to deal with things like racism. I am a woman. I am plus size. So I've had to deal with the issues that are related to those. Other than that, I'm sure there are more biases that I could think of, but we'll start with those.
I also think it's very important to kind of situate my biases. I am a woman as well. I am not Caucasian. I am Chinese Canadian. I am first generation Chinese Canadian of my family. So I've had to deal with it's not severe racism, but very subtle forms of racism, not very in your face. But I do have to admit that I grew up very privileged as well. My family was well off, so I didn't have to deal with common issues with poverty. Yeah. So I try my best to understand those issues. But of course, if something we say comes off as, hey, that's not really cool, or that's not,
let us know.
Yeah.
We're the last thing we want to try and be is problematic. Like we're here to have conversations. We're here to try and figure out the root of some of these issues and some of these interesting topics. And if we completely miss the mark, feel free to call us on it, because we're still learning. And I should point out, we both said that we're women. We're both cisgendered women. So we were both born women. That should also be pointed out.
Yes. So. Thank you for that. See, that's something I forgot to do.
Same here.
Yeah. But we're constantly learning, and we are eager to keep learning, and we are very open, and like and growing up in Victoria, or even living in Victoria, you automatically kind of assume you're green. Okay, no, that's a bad way to say it.
Victoria has this weird bubble.
Yes.
Like I would agree with you that you kind of assume that like most people in Victoria are very environmentally minded and what have you. But I don't know, man. Like I don't know. Like Victoria is very white, you know, and it's also very rich for the most part. And so it kind of comes at any environmental issue with those biases embedded in anything it does. And working within that and trying to acknowledge that and work to make it so that it's not quite so problematic and like fix those issues, you know, it's a task. It's a task that's worth doing. It's weird. Victoria's a strange beast.
Victoria is a strange beast. But we're acknowledging that Maya and I are both really privileged in terms of how we grew up and where we live. And I am immensely thankful for that.
Yeah. And I also want to put a point out here that as part of this podcast, we want to get people onto this podcast to talk with us in some of these discussions. And we're going to do our best to try and find people from all walks of life to discuss these topics. And if you have someone that you think we should talk to, let us know. You can reach us on Instagram and Twitter at EcoThink Productions, and just like send a PM, or you can contact me on my website, ecothinkproductions.com, and we'll see if we can get them on a call.
And I think that's all we have prepared.
One more question.
One more thing? Oh, bad.
Well, I just wanted to talk about what we hope the listeners will get out of this podcast.
Very important question, actually, that I completely missed.
Well, you know, ended off on a little bit of a positive note, a hopeful tone. What do you hope that someone listening to this podcast will get out of it?
I hope that they take away one fun fact from every episode, or just kind of give them a deeper or a different perspective on issues that we bring up. Because I know, although I have a lot of friends who did the same biology program as I do, we ended up different paths. And even talking to those friends now, they are not aware of a lot of, say, environmental issues or the nuances of environmental issues, and how things like biases can come into play.
For sure.
So that's what I really hope our listeners will get out of, is a validation or a change of perspective or a deeper understanding of certain topics that we cover.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I would also say I hope that listeners get a sense that they are part of a community of learners. And this is something that I heard recently on another podcast. I was listening to an interview, and I forget exactly who was speaking. My bad. I'll have to look it up. But they said something that was very poignant, is that they consider themselves a leading learner instead of an expert. And I love that. I think that's amazing. I'll make sure to look up who said that so that I can put it like in the show notes or something so you can go look it up. I think it was on the Creative Pen podcast. But anyway, Yuko and I hope to be leading learners. At least I hope that's what you hope, Yuko.
Yes. Yes.
And I also want to encourage that everyone listening to this podcast feels like they're part of that learning community, because too often science and STEAM topics in general are boxed up into these white ivory towers that seem inaccessible or difficult or expensive or it takes way too long to learn anything about. And so I hope that when you listen to this podcast, you feel like you are getting the information that you want and that you need in a way that is accessible to you and that you're excited to engage in.
I agree with that 100%. We hope to provide a nice place for everyone to learn alongside Maia and myself.
Yeah, exactly.
I also really like leading learner because I think I have imposter syndrome. And I'm like, I'm not an expert in anything. Don't ask me any questions.
Me too. But you know what? I don't even know if experts really ever get over the feeling. Mm-hmm. Maybe we should ask them. Maybe we should ask every single person that comes onto this podcast if they have imposter syndrome. I bet most of them do. Mm-hmm. I bet.
Let's collect some data and I'll provide a graph at the end of the season. I love visuals.
It's that kind of podcast, isn't it?
Thank you for listening to this episode of the EcoThink podcast. We hope you enjoyed learning something with us today. The EcoThink podcast is an official podcast of EcoThink Productions. You can find past episodes on www.ecothinkproductions.com/podcast. You can support this podcast by following us on Instagram and Twitter at EcoThink Productions, and join the Patreon on www.patreon.com/EcoThink.